I guess right now.
Chairwoman Macbeth.
Present.
Co-Vice Chair Slater. Co-Vice Chair Chippendale. Secretary Johnston.
Here.
Representative Carson.
Here.
Representative Corvese. Whip Edwards. Representative Handy. Here. Representative McKiernan. Here. Representative O'Brien. Here. Representative Palangio. Here. Representative Riley. Representative Serpa. And Representative Winfield. Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you, and thank you for the members that are here. On tonight's agenda, we have two items. We have a presentation by Beth Carter, who's the Director of House Oversight Committee, and she'll be giving us a presentation on legislation that has been enacted since the Post-Jobs Creation Guarantee Program. This is legislation that we've put in place and safeguards we've put in place since it's happened. And in the future, we will have administration here to presenting also. We've passed the legislation and what have they done with it. And then second on our agenda for this evening is a discussion of potential future legislative initiatives. This is nothing formal this evening. This is us having a discussion about what we want to see come forward legislatively. And then I will say, while there's no public testimony this evening, once we have our discussion, it will be open for public testimony, and here's where we'll ask the public to take the information that they've heard during these committee hearings and also our suggestions for legislation, and then they will have an opportunity to come before us and give us their thoughts and their ideas. So that's where we're heading with this. Any questions? Okay, Beth, please begin.
The General Assembly has passed key legislative reforms after the collapse of 38 studios to prevent a similar incident or incidences from happening in the future. I've also included some updates on the implementation of the legislation. The reforms focused on repealing the Job Creation Guarantee Act, overhauling the structure and governance of the commerce activities, and reforming the agencies that approve the deal, adding accountability to better monitor the activities of the agencies involved in economic development, and working to ensure that any new programs have safeguards and limits to prevent the all the eggs in one basket approach of the 38 studios deal. The Jobs Creation Guarantee Act was repealed in 2013 as part of the fiscal year 2014 budget. It was in Article 24. In 2013, there were several pieces of legislation to overhaul the structure and governance of the economic development activities. The Executive Office of Commerce, the Economic Planning Council, and the Council of Economic Advisors were created, and the former Economic Development Corporation was reorganized into the Commerce Corporation. Bill 6063 in 2013 created the Executive Office of Commerce, which became the state's lead agency for economic development. The goal was to integrate key government functions related to economic development under a single administrative structure. The position of Secretary of Commerce was also created to direct the office, and also he serves as CEO of the newly reconfigured Economic Development Corporation, or Commerce Corporation. Bill 6071, also in 2013, that reorganized the former EDC as the Commerce Corporation. The organization remains a quasi-public agency, but is more closely aligned with the commerce function in state government. The bill also enhances the agency's transparency and increased accountability of its programs to improve performance. The board was also required to establish guidelines, principles, policies, and processes for all the loans, loan guarantees, and other financing programs. The statute also requires the creation of a capital finance subcommittee to be responsible for drafting these guidelines, principles, and processes for the loans and loan guarantees and any other financing program, including risk assessments and metrics that the board can use to determine the effectiveness of this program. One of the things we saw in the 38 Studios issue was that there were no rules and regulations drafted before the loan guarantee was approved. It also imposes a number of transparency and good governance requirements, including performance measures, assessments based on those measures, and a code of ethics. Legislation was also passed to encourage data collection and analysis to guide the decisions and investments relating to economic development. So we're encouraging, with this legislation, it encourages good decision making. Bill 6069, also in 2013, it created the Economic Planning Council to be appointed after each gubernatorial election. The council consists of 15 people from both inside and outside of government, and they are charged with crafting a long-term economic strategy for the state to avoid any ad hoc policy approach. Bill 6070, also in 2013, created the Council of Economic Advisors. This council is charged with gathering and publishing data to inform the decision-making process. There are 9 members appointed by the governor from inside and outside of the government also. I've also included some information about the implementation of these legislative reforms. The administration will come before the committee in the future, and they'll be able to answer any questions that I'm unable to, and I'll be sure to forward any questions that you ask me to them before the hearing. The Executive Office of Commerce was established as a separate state agency by July 1st, 2015, and it's now led by Secretary Stephen Pryor. The office did prepare a comprehensive overview of the Rhode Island economy as it's required to by statute, and the director of the Division of Business Regulation currently reports to the Secretary under the structure in the fiscal year 2016 budget. The Commerce Committee, the Commerce Corporation, the Finance Subcommittee has been developing reporting and outcome measures for new programs that were created in Article 19 in last year's budget. The rules and regulations that have been approved and those in public, and the ones that have been approved and those that are still in the process and public comment are posted on the website, and a code of ethics was developed under the Chafee administration. The Economic Development Council has been appointed and has had several meetings. The long-term vision and policy was submitted by the Chafee administration before October 2014. We actually had a hearing on the roadmap process. Statute required a strategic plan to be published by December 31st in 2015. The Brookings report, which is their strategic plan, was approved by the Economic Development Council on January 9th, 2016, and the public legislative hearings required before the report is public have not been scheduled. So after that report is approved by the council, there has to be a hearing in both the House Finance and Senate Finance Committee before it can be published. So there's some public comment. The Council of Economic Advisors, there are no hard deadlines in the statutes, but the council did meet twice under the previous administration. They haven't met since 2014. Another goal of the legislative reforms was to add accountability to the agencies charged with economic development. In 2013, the General Assembly passed House Bill 6066, and that required the Office of Management and Budget to include in the Unified Economic Development Report a cost-benefit analysis of tax credits. It also required the office to compile information on the agency's compliance with reporting requirements and include that information in their budget submission. So the implementation of oversight and valuation, the cost-benefit analysis of tax credits was released in August 17th, 2015, and I don't have information on the compliance with the reporting requirement, and I'm sure the administration will answer any questions on that. The General Assembly also ensured that any new economic development programs have limits and safeguards. In 2013, in Article 22 of the budget, of the 2014 budget, they revamped the historic tax credit program, and they included a total funding limit per project cap and opportunities for nonprofits to act as brokers. And in Governor Raimondo's 2015 economic development initiatives were originally proposed with very few limits, and that did present some opportunities to repeat some of the past mistakes. So the General Assembly added limitations on the total amount of the share or the total amount that could be allocated to one entity, and reporting and evaluation requirements. And the programs actually sunset in 3 years. And that would require the General Assembly, that absolutely requires the General Assembly to reevaluate the programs for them to continue. And that's my presentation on the legislative reforms. Does anybody have any questions?
Representative Handy?
Thank you, Chair. Beth, and I know you worked a lot on the Commerce Corporation stuff when it was, so you might, otherwise I might not know if you'd know the answer along the way, but do they, the things like the open meetings law and things like that apply to Commerce and the other quasi-publics?
Yes, they do.
So they, okay. And then the other thing that was,
They apply
entity,
to Commerce and
the Commerce Corporation, the quasi, at least they were along the way. And the Executive Office of Commerce is different, right, than the Commerce Corporation? That's under the
under the governor. It's an administrative.
Right, yeah, no, just suddenly I saw the DBR director was reporting to the person. I was thinking, well, that doesn't make sense. Why would the DBR director report to a quasi? So that
Right,
makes
it's
sense.
a little confusing. The Executive Office of Commerce, the secretary is also the CEO of the Commerce Corporation, and there's a COO who is at the Commerce Corporation who does the daily function of the Commerce Corporation.
Okay, so that makes more sense too then. Thank you.
Representative Carson?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
A couple of things. This is a lot of the stuff that I was very interested in. And through no fault of your own, it was a lot of information for me to absorb very quickly. So I was like trying to remember all the questions that I had. I don't know. I think it's almost better that I submit some questions to you or meet with you or something, because I wanted to know more meat on the bone, or maybe when the administration comes, I wanted to know more about the accountability pieces.
Sure.
Like on page 2, it says add accountability. On page 4, it says add accountability. I don't know what that means.
A lot of it is reporting requirements. So they have to put metrics in the Commerce Corporation. Their programs have to have metrics. So they have to have performance standards, and then they have to report on those performance standards.
Or it depends upon what it is?
Right. And those reports will also be sent to the General Assembly.
Okay.
I think what we can do, because Beth can come back next time, and if you have questions, certainly there are probably questions that the general public would have too, so I would suggest not having a meeting, but doing it here so that the questions you have can be asked. And
right, and if the administration is here, they could probably tell you more about how it runs day to day.
Hold on one second.
Sure.
There was one other question that I had about Do you know anything about the legislative hearings for the Brookings report?
They have not been
Right.
scheduled yet.
And then there was also,
But
there's
they
no
are in
meetings on the
statute.
economic advisors since 2014?
According to the Secretary of State's website, I did not see any.
Yeah. There's a few things in here worth noting. Okay, I'll go over them. Thank you very much.
There are quite a few things in here worth noting, so there's no reason to rush it tonight. Certainly take the time, go through it. It is a lot of information, especially if you hadn't been here in 2013 to already vet this and discuss it. So certainly that's part of what we're going to do here. Are there any other questions? Okay, and again, the Department of Administration will be here next time, so certainly go through and we'll have questions ready for them. The next piece on the agenda is to talk about legislation, and we're not in a very good setup here on the way we are to have discussions. But certainly at this point, see it broken down into 3 sections, and you may see it differently. But certainly through the information that we've received over the last several months, we can talk about legislation having to do with moral obligation bonds, and then other legislation specifically on tax credits. And then the third piece of this that I see, and I was hoping Representative Riley would be here too, and there are bills floating around or drafts of floating around. I certainly had one that I was working on for an inspector general. So those are the 3 areas right now that I see legislative ideas, but certainly it's committee and you have thoughts of where you would like this to go to. So if anybody wants to start, or we can talk about the moral obligation bonds, or Representative Handy?
The Inspector General, I think, is a great. I know former Rep. Valencia's had it, and I know Rep. Riley's worked on it, and other folks have worked on it. So I think that's an excellent place. Again, I think it's somebody that could potentially really help to save the state money, as well as also really watch for, be a voice for looking to catch things before they get too far out of control, I think, too. And so I certainly would echo that, and I think that would be that makes a lot of sense to me for Oversight Committee, too. I think it's a logical committee to look at that type of legislation, and it doesn't fit as well into other places except for finance because of the fiscal side, but definitely from the policy side, we're the logical place for something like that. And along those same kinds of lines, if there are other, the only other thing I thought about was this sort of notion of I suppose it's more of a rules question than a legislative one, but the idea of thinking about ways and means, and so looking at this committee is the sort of ways around looking at the policy side of it, but again, when it needs to be vetted for fiscal things, obviously then maybe also would go to the Finance Committee, but again, that's a different policy decision than this, but it's something else I've thought about as well, so that'd be my 2 cents. Or
Right.
7 cents.
Representative Corvese, who wasn't able to be here this evening, had expressed concerns to me that he feels if the EDC had followed their regulations and their rules that they had, this would have never happened. And the fact that they didn't, and they just pushed them aside and did what they wanted to, is what really led to the whole 38 Studios issue. And what he was looking for is, whether it's the Auditor General or an Inspector General, to look at this, not to change policy, not to change or new policy, but look at it strictly of these are the rules and are they following it. And so I did explain to him that I would express his concerns, and whether that looks like an Inspector General or under the Auditor General. We do have former legislation, as you said, that's out there. We have some that's being offered, and certainly if this committee would like, we can get copies of all of that along with the one that I was starting to work on, and each one of you can take a peek at it and make your recommendations. There's differences in there of, is it an elected position, is it not an elected position, who oversees them, does it go through the Attorney General or doesn't it go through the Attorney General? So there's certainly pieces that we can have a discussion in probably an easier setting, maybe roundtable than here. Anybody else want to? Yes.
Sorry for, I got to turn your mic on. We're going to do this on the mic. Turn it on. Here we go. I can do this. In looking at all the different ideas, I would like to see something where there's an automatic, even if it's just a written report that comes back to this committee. This is what we're doing with the money that's been allotted to us, and here's our report. And it's just so that they know that that's going to have to happen, and it has to be, I would say, in real time. So it could be just a written type of report. We've just made a $200,000 loan to XYZ Corporation. Here's what we're thinking is going to happen.
And are you meaning the Commerce Corporation with that?
Whoever's, and again, I don't know how it's going to end up looking, but whoever is overseeing any program of, similar to what this was, it was an effort to create business, to attract business. So if that's going to happen, we can't obviously run that. We're part-time legislators, but when the rubber meets the road, if they have a quick report, it doesn't have to be in any great detail, but if we're interested in it, we could have someone come by and tell us about it.
Representative Carson?
I was struck by the presentation about the tax credits, and I don't profess to understand how the whole system works. But what struck me was that there were different types of tax credits. They were handled by different departments. They had different rules. I didn't know whether or not each of the departments that handled the different types of tax credit had all the necessary financial expertise to really review it, because it does require some financial expertise to understand this. And I didn't know if they were staffed adequately to handle them appropriately and equally. That was another concern that I have. So, and that did strike me, and that did stay with me throughout our sessions. Were there any other ideas that were percolating on the tax credits?
Well, we had the recommendations from the treasurer, certainly on those, and he was very specific on that. And I believe that he does have legislation coming from that testimony that he had in front of us that may be going to finance, which would make sense. That would be the committee that it goes to. But certainly we have, should we change the refundable rate of the tax credits? And he spoke to that, so that was also on that. And I'm just looking at my notes for this. And should we increase the market efficiency by putting all tax credits transactions on a website? Figuring if it's more visible out there, that would make a difference. And he had his other recommendations from that. I think they were strong recommendations, and I think they certainly would address our concerns with that. Certainly, we all may have our unique perspective of whether we should be doing tax credits or shouldn't we, and that would be something that I would look to each one of you on that when we look at, for example, the movie tax credits and the theater tax credits. What has that meant for the state? But also, what does it mean for not just the entities that are getting the tax credits, but the loss that causes to the state? Because it is a loss. We don't make up all that money. And could that money be invested someplace else where we'd get more bang for our buck? And again, that's part of this committee in looking at that and looking at the numbers that we've been given to look at.
I also think he spoke of having the state broker the tax credits instead of having it done privately in order to save some money. Did I get that correct?
That was within the website part of it, and then having somebody. And currently, he talked about it being run through nonprofits. So there's already been things put into place to try to take that middleman out of it, like we've seen, where you can have that person trying to make millions off of our backs. This would take it further than that. And then this could take even more of the issues out when we start maybe the 90 cents to $1 and putting that into place. And he spoke to that's a risk. So certainly we have those recommendations coming forward from the treasurer. And then is there anybody else that would like to speak about tax credits? So quiet. Okay.
I would say that his presentation was thorough. The written materials were very informative. Mm-hmm. I think deferring to him is a good idea.
And then we have our moral obligation bonds. And I think this is where we really need to delve on who is able to issue moral obligations. And certainly from that point, I'm looking for further information, not just in moral obligation bonds, but all bonds. Who in the state has the authority to go out and do this bonding? And that's certainly something that is in the works that we're gathering. And I don't think we have a clear answer of that right now, of everybody who can bond and what that means. So that goes beyond just the moral obligation bonds. And as I've tried to come up with some rough drafts of where we could go with the moral obligation bonds, we're still working on that and getting answers, because again, you have the airport, and that's a different entity in what they may need for moral obligation bonds. And then looking at possibly the effects of, if we require General Assembly vote on this, we are a part-time legislature and we're not year-round, is it possible to do that? And then if there's an emergency that comes up where one of these entities would need to do a moral obligation bond, does it go to the Senate President and the Speaker? So that's kind of some rough draft thoughts moving forward with the moral obligation bonds. But certainly from that presentation, what struck me most was when he did speak about the airport and the bonds and what happens if there was a default on that, then who's overseeing and who's in charge and owning of the airport. So again, that's something we're still delving into. But maybe other committee members came up with ideas on that. Representative Handy?
The only other thing I'd had, and it's really more anecdotal, and I don't have as much knowledge on it, but I know, and I don't feel like it came up much in the testimony. I may have missed hearings on it, but I know at least the cost of bonding and things like that, and maybe even trying to look at, are there things other like the middleman question, things like that. Are there other ways that the state can help both the state as well as the municipalities and the quasis maybe try to find ways to be to save money out of that equation? I mean, again, I don't want to. The only thing the thing that popped in my head was, again, that issue with the folks that are selling the credits. But I know that bond attorneys make a fair amount off of it. Is there something the state could do to take on a role there that you want to have experts in those things? I understand, but it is something at least I wouldn't mind knowing better about, whether there are those kinds of things to look at too. The whip just was pointing out maybe somebody in the treasurer's office or something like that, that would give that equation. I think that's a good idea.
Are there any other areas that you would like us to become more formal in looking forward to legislation? All right, so certainly we've put this out to the committee, but to the public also, in those three areas of the moral obligation bonds, the tax credits, and an inspector general or the auditor general. So we will welcome public testimony from the public here in front of our committee, and certainly they may have other ideas, so we'll look forward to that. And then just kind of on a housekeeping note, as you know, we had requested months ago for information from Deloitte. And Deloitte was hired by the former governor to do a forensic audit. And we had requested from this committee twice from the EDC for documents pertaining to that. And we received some documents, but they used some legalese within their response to us that appeared we weren't getting all of the documents. So Deloitte certainly has been very forthcoming, and at this point we, I think, are receiving today, if not tomorrow, more documents, but I believe it's upwards of over 250, possibly 500 documents from Deloitte that we will be reviewing, because I have always felt that ordering of the forensic audit and not completing that was a very big piece for us to look at. So certainly the committee will be getting copies of that, and we will be bringing that also to oversight. And just to follow up, because there's this relationship between the EDC and Deloitte and what they legally have to give and not give, I will be following up with a letter to Deloitte asking if there are any documents or any correspondence or anything that they did not give to our committee because the EDC said no. So again, we're taking one more step with them to make sure that we are getting everything, because I felt EDC was saying they gave us everything that they had to under the law, and suddenly we're getting more documents. So and that just transpired between yesterday and today. So.
May I make a sort of a general comment on that?
Absolutely.
So whatever law they're citing to, I think that's the type of law that we as an oversight committee ought to look at because that's the point. If we are authorizing monies as a state legislature, and then they're doing things that, as we saw the 38 Studios shows clearly that after the money was approved and the idea, the concept went elsewhere, that's where all the trouble really began. And we need to have some answering, and we should be able to get whatever we want. And that's my 2 cents.
I absolutely agree. And I will get copies of the letter that we received, but also copies that we had sent back in July 7th of 2014. And what was the other date? May 13th of 2014. And thank you, Beth. I don't know where she went. But I said, I remember 2 letters, and she had it out of our tens of thousands of documents. She had them ready to go today for me. And it's Rhode Island General Law 38-2-2, parentheses 4. But I'll get copies of those for you, and then also the correspondence that I had from Deloitte, and whatever information that we receive today or tomorrow when more comes in.
I'm going to look that up, and maybe I'll have a bill suggesting something on that being edited.
That sounds good, because I absolutely agree. You have the EDC Commerce Corporation, in which we put a lot of trust in, and then they tell us they don't have to provide us documents. Yeah, that absolutely. Any other comments from the committee? Well, this was a short meeting, but certainly moving forward, it's going to have a lot of substance. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
We're adjourned.